we get into it. Right. So, as I was saying, right now we've been practicing planning for a specific class, planning for half an hour, planning for an hour maybe, where we're going to focus on a specific topic and try to develop all of these steps that we've been going through, from an opening, going through an introduction, going through some practice, getting the students to hone some of their English skills, and then coming to a close which makes sense with what we've covered in this session, right? But now we want to put that into a larger context because classes don't exist in a void. And it's very important for us to find a way to connect everything that our students are supposed to learn in a given amount of time. And so we generally have a program that we need to follow, and that could be either a book or the CEFR levels, which is the case for many of us. We find these are a very good guideline to get us thinking about what skills we need to achieve by the end of a cycle, of a learning cycle. And so I'm going to share my screen once more. Hold on. And I also really want to hear from you, from all the reflections that you've had trying to plan for one class, because sometimes it feels like you need to cover everything in this one class because you just get like this topic. And these topics are so large that sometimes it's like, oh, I need to teach them this and that. And then you're like, how am I going to do this in the time that I have? And so I feel like many of you probably have already encountered this and come up with ideas on how to sort of make it into smaller bits. So today we're going to talk about scope and sequence, as your program has already told you. And we're finally gonna find that the pieces are falling into place because we have objectives that seem very large. And when we're thinking about planning, that's a great idea. It's how you started, right? Like you start from like the big objective, and then you break it down into smaller bits. And some of those smaller bits are the classes that we're giving. So to get us started, I would like everyone, or as many of you as feel comfortable doing it, sharing when you started out planning, what was your objective? Where were your sights? Were you kind of calibrating right? What were you focusing on? So maybe we can kind of connect two moments, right? When you started planning, what were you focusing on? And as you progressed and as you got comments, how did that change? Anyone? Go ahead, Sandra.
Yes, thanks. I think when I started planning, I had an objective. Like I tried to follow a guide that I found, well, that we had. But then I realized with my comments that like in order to know to do this, they need to know this, and they need to know this other thing, and they need to know this other thing. And so I realized there was like a bunch of things they needed to know to do what I wanted them to do.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it changed by going smaller and smaller, I guess.
Yeah, that's that's pretty much it. Yeah. Anyone else? Did they find something similar happen to them where they had like this large objective and they were like, "Oh yeah, or I'm gonna do this in my class," and then they were like, "Oh, maybe I need to make it a little bit smaller and just focus on this bit." Yeah. I find this often happens to me. I get pretty greedy with my objectives. I like to cover a lot of ground. And then sometimes I have to step back and wonder whether this is the right way for my students to actually get what I want them to get out of the class, get the practice that I want them to get, and actually learn the things that I want them to learn. So, this is where our larger sequence comes into play. It helps us kind of guide how we break down our classes. And sequences should also help us reinforce previous knowledge and keep like the evaluation going. Like the assessments become an integral part of the class, and they become more of a learning tool than an actual evaluation tool. They can be a little bit of both, I think. There's actually like an approach, like a whole theory about like is it like learning assessment, cannot remember the name of this thing, but there's like a whole thing about it. I'll send it to you guys through Samantha later because I found some things to read about that. And finally, we also need to find like our whole map of a learning cycle that we want to cover and adapt for a group specific needs. And you've also already done this when you've started thinking about your learning environments, about the groups that you might have, what grade they're in. So once we have like our program and our some of the features of the group that we're going to teach, that helps us sort of map out how we need to break down all of these objectives into smaller bits that are useful and that are cumulative. Of course, sometimes our program demands of us to learn skills that seem less connected. They're all connected, obviously, but sometimes you need to find a way to sort of pick a cycle where you're focusing on a group of things and then move on to a different cycle and yet connect all the pieces. So, um, for reference, you are probably going to be working with some reference that can be kind of converted into the CEFR levels, which are the Common European framework for language evaluation. So this actually goes through like 3 different letters. So we have the beginners who are A levels, and then we have intermediates, B levels, and then we have kind of like experts, right? C levels. So when we're considering this to be our guideline, this is kind of like the general idea of what you can do in each level, right? So pre A1, I'm including it because when you're looking, well, Samantha shared with me a, hold on, it's a program that kind of equates elementary grades with some of these expected achievements, right? So it starts out at pre A1, where you're basically vocabulary building and building like the most basic structures. And then it goes to A1, which is a beginner, like an entry level for communication. So pre A1 will include being able to understand and to produce language at the level of giving basic information, basic description, very short, simple phrases, right? And getting used to the sounds of the language, like the phonics and everything, that would be pre A1. And as we go along, it progresses to become a little bit more complex in each level. So in A1, we're thinking communicating very common, everyday expressions for immediate needs. When this is set in an elementary level, that also means like things that are most related to family, to hobbies, to school. You can introduce yourself, you can give some personal details. So this is the level that many of you will be working at because as I understand, some of you will be working with like second grade, third grade, right? I remember some of you having like first grade, second grade. So that would be like the pre A1, A1 levels. And then A2 levels would be like higher, the second bit of elementary school. So maybe like fifth through sixth grade. And at this point, we're aiming for students to understand sentences, to understand common expressions about familiar topics, and also start describing a little bit more fluently their past, their environment, and also immediate needs. So these are our entry levels, and that basically covers elementary school. So that's what most programs are focused on. And then for those of you who might be working with middle school, B1 level would be relevant because that would be like a very, very good goal to aspire to, where you can already understand the main points of very clear text. I'm so sorry for the double E's. I think that's my keyboard. I'm noticing that I have a lot of double E's um, here and there, and it's been happening. I need to check my keyboard. Sorry. So never mind the spelling error. So produce organized text. So we're also thinking about like the level at which our students are, right? So at this point, we would expect them to be able to connect their opinion a little bit more in a bit more of a complex way, and then describe experiences, events, wishes. That means that we start getting into modal verbs a little bit more, aspirations, their opinions, their plans. We're talking about not our regular tenses, but also imaginary things, right? So this is a very good guideline to sequence because in this scheme, we have very clear objectives and we can kind of calibrate how achievable, mm, how much we want to challenge our students, because sometimes we feel like we need to get them like all the way to A2 from the beginning or all the way to expressing more complex things, and we need to remember that we are building all of these blocks, and so it's okay to stay at a communicative level that is a little bit more basic sometimes and get that like really really settled in before we move on. So over here in the upper part, we have a program for first grade. It's a little bit clear below, but what we have here is they have like the topic and then the skill. I need my pointer. Hold on. Where's my pointer? Yeah. Yeah, so this line would be like the topic, and here we have like different skills that we need to develop and where we want to get our students. And once we have a guideline like this, it's easier to kind of just go into it and decide, okay, so on this class I'm gonna focus on some of this vocabulary, trying to do a little bit of writing and stuff, and then I'm gonna connect it to something else. And they even have some suggestions in this guideline. So these would be like possible resources and examples of activities that can be built in this level. Ah, here it is. So it's school grade, and then you have topics, right? And then when you have a topic, you need to break it down a little bit into what abilities you want to achieve, and those become objectives. And you can kind of mix them together a little bit. And as you see, when we're in the lower degrees, there's a lot of time considered in these kinds of plans to the speaking section. We're giving it a little bit more priority, and then there's a lot of time given to speaking plus listening, and then a little less time in reading and writing. But that can definitely be adapted to the needs of the group. And I would think, in my experience, that writing is always important from the get-go. Even if it is just words, even if it is just like very, very short sentences, it's a good idea to give writing a role in each class. So we have vocabulary, and here, okay, oh, I think I changed the order of something. Yeah, these were supposed to go first, right? So here I broke down where we are in each grade according to this program and what the expected topics are. So first grade through fifth grade, we're focusing on an A1 level, and we are working with these topics, right? So as you see, we have less topics in first grade, so you can kind of go into them and work on them for longer. And as we move on, we have a few more topics, a few more structures that we want the students to be able to replicate. And that gives us a little less time for each topic, but it gives us a chance for connectivity, right? So fifth and sixth grade would start focusing on an A2 level, as well as the first year of middle school. And then the second and third years of middle school would focus on a B1 level, right? So this is a good way to sort of like look at your scope. Like this is all you're going to cover. So now break it down. Now make like smaller objectives. And once you have like the objectives, you have the vocabulary that you're going to use for those objectives well defined, then you can start planning with your sequence in mind. It's not only about the objective of the day, but you want to get achievable goals that aren't probably going to be reached in only one session. And you need to think about how you're going to interconnect these objectives, because it makes more sense for students if what they have practiced in the classes before plays some part in the classes that come after. So don't be afraid to go a little bit slow. It's not about covering everything in one class. And I think you've already kind of realized that in planning out for your sessions, for your classes, right? And then I would think that something very important about sequence is that as I cannot remember who it was that shared something about how they kind of check back with some of the things from the class before when they do their opening. It's always a good idea to reinforce the basics as you progress down the sequence. So while we are trying to model new structures, it's a great idea to sort of like do little callbacks to structures that came before, just to make sure that they're still there. And this is also a way to curb this situation that we discussed, where some students or a big part of the classroom kind of keeps forgetting things. So we need to be very mindful of our sequence reinforcing previous knowledge and us bringing it up intentionally as we go along the sequence. Also, as I was saying, like many programs will give a greater role to speaking abilities, especially for the younger children, which is challenging because they sometimes have less less vocabulary, less structures that they can produce, and but it's a good idea to get them speaking, to get them listening a lot, because that kind of helps them think about what they're structuring, like practice it over and over and over again. So speaking is a great idea, but as I said, it's for me, it's very important that students try to write something very, very simple each class, even from the, well, obviously not in kindergarten where they probably don't even know the letters, but from the elementary levels, it's a good idea to get them writing a little bit. And as you go through your sequence, it's a good idea to consider several classes with a similar objective where you can focus a little bit more on one of the communicative skills. And then always have like some of the basics that you realize are useful to your group, but maybe delve a little deeper into writing in one of them, reading in a different one, speaking in a different one, and then make that the focus of your class so that you balance them out a little bit more. Um, it's frequent that students are very responsive to more receiving communicative skills at the beginning of the sequence, and then they can go on to productive communicative skills as you move along the sequence. So that's a good way to structure a sequence. For me, it works. And I also feel that it's a great way to get the students used to the language. It's funny because I was thinking back to very elementary English classes with very, very small children. And there's something to just listening to the language, listening to little stories, listening to very basic things. Even if they're not getting all of it, it kind of sticks. It's really funny how younger kids are super super receptive to stories, especially if they have like something in them that is that captures their attention, that really draws them in, like drawings, like sounds, like stuff like that. I feel like it's something that kind of stays with them. And then after, when they're able to produce some of the language, it kind of comes back and it helps them get there faster. So in a kindergarten that I was familiar with, they used to read stories to the children at the end of English classes. And it was just like a page or two, and you didn't always you could see that not all of the children were understanding everything that was happening in the text, but because the books were so large and the images were so captivating, they were very drawn in to the stories, and the teachers would read the same book, I think probably a few times through the year, so it was kind of a treat at the end of class. And by the end, the kids knew some of the words in the story, they reacted, and it was very interesting how that played into their learning process, and how little by little they got a little bit more of the same story. So I thought that that was a great way to connect their sequence, because it started out being kind of something more abstract for the kids, and in the end they could get some of the phrases. So I thought that that was an interesting way to focus on listening and to get the kids producing the language eventually. And also remember that at the basic levels and also at the beginning of our sequences, we need to give a little more weight to the vocabulary building and make sure that that is also well established before we move on to more complex activities. And again, this is a great area where you can also work on phonics a lot. You can work on spelling a lot. Spelling bees can be super, super fun if you make them about like movement-based learning. And they get the students to a point where they are very excited about engaging in activities further along the line. And again, like plan for assessment, which promotes the learning um, down the sequence line. So this would mean making the assessment also part of the resource building in class. And I have an example at the end that I've been wanting to kind of get going, but I still haven't had the time to build this like little experiment that I want to do. So I'll talk about that later. I don't know if you have any reflections about these things that I try to talk about, share right now. Have you started working on sequence? Sandra, go on.
Yeah, thanks. I think it has a little bit to do with a problem that Leslie mentioned in another class. Like how do you keep the sequence going if you're starting like from the middle and the part before is not so clear? Like how do you, yeah, like how do you keep on going without having started that well yet? I mean, I haven't experienced this problem, but I'm kind of imagining it could happen. So I'm kind of, yeah, curious how to work with that.
So you're concerned about you're supposed to start a class assuming previous knowledge. Is that it?
Yeah, like yeah, yeah, that.
So, yeah, it's safe not to assume. So, I would think that a great point to also calibrate your sequence is to carry out an assessment of what they're expected to know at the beginning of the line. Because if you start assuming that they do know something, that could really set you back. So, it's a good idea to give a little space for kind of reminders. So maybe you're starting, I don't know, fifth grade, and then you're supposed to start with present perfect, but you're not sure how strong they are in the abilities that they're supposed to know. And obviously, like we're starting a new school year. Sometimes people are a little rusty, so maybe it's a good idea to make sure that they know some things from before you really get into present perfect, right? So maybe you check on simple past, or I don't know, simple present.
Ay, creo que no eres tú, Sandra. Sí, se nos fue. ¿Marisa? Ok, sí, sí, creo que se nos fue. Va, ¿les parece si esperamos unos segunditos? En lo que también podemos ahondar en lo que preguntaste, Sandra. No sé, de acuerdo a la respuesta que te dio Marisa, ¿tienes alguna duda, pregunta?
No, creo que más bien como que necesitaba que me dijeran como está bien regresarte tantito como a lo de antes, ¿no? Porque, bueno, me pasó a mí como en algunas clases que es como de, bueno, y ahora vamos a trabajar con esto y es como, "Ah, tal vez ya deberías saberme esto otro y pues como que te pierdes tantito, ¿no? Entonces, pues poniéndome un poquito, bueno, como lo mencionaba Les, pues sí me preocupaba, ¿no? Digo, ¿qué tal que yo llego aquí como de vamos a ver todo esto que debieron ver toda su primaria y pues, no se acuerdan, ¿no? Entonces es como no puedo regresarme a enseñarles todo lo de la primaria porque pues, bueno, no sé, creo que no se puede. Y yo porque pues no sé, creo que no se puede, ¿no?
Oigan, y podemos hacer o darles un spoiler, ¿qué les parece? Porque ahorita de lo que hablamos del scope and sequence, pues es un ejercicio, ¿no? Para comenzar a priorizar el contenido, para ver qué tendría más sentido, ¿no? De acuerdo a los puntos que ya nos compartió Marisa. Pero algo bien importante que vamos a hacer ya más cercano a entrar a las escuelas es hacer una prueba pre y una prueba post, ¿no? Esta prueba pre nos va a dar información de en dónde están nuestros estudiantes. Podemos después también hablar de cómo hacer una prueba para estudiantes, a lo mejor de primero, de segundo, que pueden tener algunas dificultades para escribir, ¿no? Entonces, después podemos ver qué instrumentos vamos a utilizar, cómo se ve esto, pero esto tal vez, Sandra, nos da un insumo de qué es lo que saben nuestros estudiantes y en dónde están, ¿no? Y luego también creo que podríamos preguntar con con la comunidad educativa, ¿no? Como ritmos de aprendizaje, ¿no? A lo mejor les gustan un poquito más, a veces, entonces también nuestros mejores aliados son los docentes titulares, ¿no? Como porque saben, ya tienen bastante conocimiento, más si han estado con ellos en otros grados, te pueden decir, ¿no? Y así como en la misma clase, equipo, cuando planificamos una cosa y creo que decían en alguna sesión, ¿no? Como que esta clase va a cambiar la vida de los estudiantes, ¿no? Y vamos con bastantes expectativas y te das cuenta, creo lo decía Sale, ¿no? No se saben la hora, no saben leer la hora, pues también como aprender a tomar decisiones en el momento y que digan: "Está bien", ¿no? O sea, me regreso tantito, paro con el objetivo de que todas y todos avancemos. Entonces, les ponía en el chat, ¿no? Puede ser flexible, este primer ejercicio, y también podemos ir pensando como de dónde podemos tomar evidencia para poder priorizar. Y esto lo que mencionaba Uva, ¿no? Como cómo poder hacer un diagnóstico para poder, planificar como esta secuencia. Marisa, estábamos hablando sobre, también los insumos que podemos obtener, como la evidencia para poder planificar la secuencia, ¿va? Bienvenida.
Mhm.
Ah,
So this would be like an initial assessment? Oh,
right. Ah, creo que estamos viendo tu pantalla, pero con notas. No sé si, mm,
okay.
can you
Stop.
eh,
Okay. Open sequence. Is this it?
yes, but we are like we can see slide 7 of 12. It's not the
Oh,
complete
okay.
screen.
Let me get out of this then and try again. Right. Okay. Yeah. So maybe what I would do is for the first openings, I would ask things that are expected, like I would expect them to have like some notion of, to get like a starting line. So maybe, as I was saying, the first few classes can be kind of a calibration of the sequence according to what is happening there. And the explanations could also include callbacks to knowledge that I would expect us students to have at some level. It doesn't really make sense to go into all of these if some things are very, very shaky, right? So yeah, as I say, assessment becomes kind of a learning tool, and it becomes a place where you can get a better idea of how your sequence is expected to flow a little bit. So I think that maybe that's how I would go about it. Uh, mm, Around this. Oh, we have something in the chat. Oh, okay. Is anyone else having audio issues? Is it me?
Creo que ya se regularizó. A ver, intenta hablar de nuevo, Marisa.
Okay. So yeah, as I was saying, I don't know if anyone else has had experience with this or has any ideas of how to curb this issue regarding previous knowledge that they're expected to have. Oh, okay. Someone else is having audio problems. Is it coming clear? Is it coming through clear right now? Kind of? Okay. Okay. Thanks. So anyone else have an idea of how they might go about trying to start a class at some point and at some expected point and working with that previous knowledge that is assumed to be present in the group, or at least that they might have a notion of? No?
Pues por acá que me ha tocado, por ejemplo, acompañar a Leslie, seguro lo que ya les contaba ella, ¿no? Que nota que sus estudiantes eh, no tienen ciertas bases y que ella tiene que seguir el plan, pero no puede regresarse del todo. Entonces, creo que lo que funcionó por acá es que
ella no es que se haya regresado del todo a enseñarles la base, pero sí traía algunos de los elementos y los incorporaba en las clases. Entonces, si bien no es que les estuviera enseñando bases, sino más bien continuaba con el programa tal cual que estaba establecido, iba incorporando algunos elementos de lo que se supone ya deberían de saber sus estudiantes. Y creo que eso fue lo que le ayudó a ir ahí maniobrando a lo largo del semestre con ellos y ellas, para que al final, a través del diagnóstico, en la prueba post, se dio cuenta de que sí habían aprendido algo, ¿no? Relacionado con el plan curricular que estaba establecido. Entonces, como que uno tiene que ir navegando entre sí regresar poquito y solo añadir un poco del contenido previo al contenido que por sí ya revisó.
Mhm. In my case, I'm a little bit tough with that because I like to focus on, well, once they have a sentence structure established in their background, I go pretty hard with verb structure, and I feel like this is an interesting way to sort of disarm all of these arguments that English is hard or whatever. So I'll do this thing. I'm gonna actually draw it here, maybe if I have the space. So I'll do this thing where I kind of remind them that they know stuff. And the way I do that is I remind them that English is so much easier than Spanish because it only has very few verb forms. And so I'll do a little schematics that looks like this. It always looks like this. So I'll do 3 columns. Oh no, that's not the right color. And as I tell you, I'm very obsessive about my color coding. So it's always blue, and then it's always pink, and then it's always green. And what I'll do is I'll grab some of the verbs that they know. At this point, I'm trying to kind of figure out like what words are familiar and stuff, or very common verbs that they are expected to know at that point, and I'll conjugate it. And what I'll do is I'll do base form, and then because this one, each one of them goes like that. Oh no, that's not the right color. And the thing is, I'll sort of build to the tense structures by doing this. And I've tried this with kids and I've tried this with adults, and I mean, again, there are people who respond better to this because it's very schematic, very kind of abstract at first. But there are people who need different types of practice, and that's very often the case. And so I'll do that. And here in the pink ones, I'll have present simple here, present conjugations, and then I'll have the gerund. And I'll remind them, you know this one. This is super easy, ing. And then I'll do past and past participle here, and I'll tell them. So the only really kind of difficult part here is past and past participle, because that's where English gets kind of funky, right? So I'll grab a bunch of regular verbs and just run them through this, because what I'll do is I'll write like the endings, the common endings for all of this. So it's like ed, and then maybe I'll grab another conjugation group, like the ones that go, I don't know, like began and begun. So an A sound and a U sound here. And then I'll just run the verbs through here. And they'll see that everything only has like 6 ways of being written if it's a verb. And then I'll relate it to the structure that we're using. So I'll tell them, okay, so if we only use like, I don't know, this one and this one, you already know how to write a sentence like that. I like pizza. I liked pizza. So now we're gonna play with some of the other forms of verbs, and then I'll build from that. So it's kind of super easy to just keep on a wall. I actually make it into a little GIF. And if I'm doing online classes, I'll send the GIF where everything is conjugated in every possible way. And then when we're explaining a structure, I'll just say, like, if we're doing present perfect or really any of the perfect tenses, what we need is we'll start with the verb have, and the verb have will always be here, right? Because we're doing present perfect, right? So here is where our verb is. We have the verb, what color am I? Okay, so have or has. And then after that, we just forget about everything else. And the next verb after have is always going to be right here. So I'll compare that to past simple, for example, and then I'm calling back to past simple, which is something they're supposed to already know how to build, and I'll compare it to a new structure. But I guess that's, again, like I'll also have a bunch of different examples, and I'll, for example, find little comic books where I have examples of both types of sentences and be like, okay, so which one is this one? Which one is that one? Where's our verb? Where's our have verb? Where's our other verb? Is this a verb in past participle or is it just past? So I'll try to do that. That one has come in handy. It takes like at least one class to do this and to practice and to kind of like get children to notice like the differences in the same word, and to notice that they probably already heard it at some point in their lives. But it pays off. I think this technique really has been useful to me, and I find it to be very good because I can go back to it every time I, especially maybe for have different tenses or different or expressions and stuff like that. You can kind of call back to this, and it makes it quite. Yeah. Erase that because it's just gonna stay. But there are many ways to do this, and obviously there are more playful ways to do this and less like heavy cartoons and little comics. I really love like Calvin and Hobbes for kids who are, and Garfield for kids who are younger. You just need, they're very interesting because they only have a couple of phrases, like a very, very small conversation, and they become quite good material for them to delve into. Okay. So shall we move on with this? So again, really, once you have this schematics of where you want to get, objectives can become a little bit easier because then you can just sit down for a moment and be like, okay, so what would I expect at the end of the year? What could we listen to or read that would make sense and that would include all of this? You build towards that. You can kind of find like a very large objective that includes at least a part of what you want to achieve. Because obviously in these first grades, it's easier. And then as you move along, maybe you want to pick like some things that could produce like a specific observable learning, like learning assessment tool, and then pick another group, another little learning cycle where that connects to something new, right? So this is actually what we were talking about. So it's a good idea to get like an initial idea of where you stand with regards to language, especially language that you're going to use to build towards the new objectives. And make sure that you already have, or you're providing the building blocks before you move on, which also means, as Sandra Sam very keenly observed, that sometimes you navigate a little bit back and forth and navigate towards something that maybe you weren't the person who covered, but you need to kind of review before you move on and make sure that that part is clear enough for you to start building toward your objective and toward the next objective. So when you're doing your objectives, you always need to think back and you always need to think forward and be like, okay, so what did I need to get here, and what will I build towards in my next objective? How do I connect it to what's coming? And in that way, maybe you can make some of the vocabulary lists that you have, some of the activities that you have, not belong to one single class, but rather connect throughout classes, throughout sessions, throughout even learning cycles, so that you can still have comebacks and have people practicing things well, not constantly, but you have them kind of like going back to something in order to move on. And remember that you don't need to cover every single aspect of a topic at the beginner levels. At the beginner levels, you want to get them started with like how to approach a topic in very, very specific, simple ways. Less complicated communication, you have less words to work with, and that's okay. So if you notice that your objectives are need too many new things, maybe you need to simplify them a little bit, and then maybe include those things that will build towards a more complex version of that objective later on in your sequence, or as they're moving on to a higher level. So with regards to communication skills, it's a good idea to spread out oral practice and then focus sessions on some target skills so that they have a little more time spent with those. And again, don't skim on writing tasks. Even if they're super simple, they are so useful because English is a language that is weird when it comes to writing. So the earlier on you get used to some words and how they're spelled and how you're supposed to write them and the order, that also helps you construct phrases that are a little bit more complex in your oral practice. And then learning evidence. So learning evidence can become a resource, and that could be like this like ongoing assessment where you kind of connect objectives. But you could also go for more project style planning, where some of your objectives build towards something larger, where you can assess several things all at once. Or go about different objectives by using a tool that just keeps on having more content. So when you're sequencing to strengthen all the skills and give the students a chance to navigate back and forth between this, right? So this is what I was trying to go for, like this project style planning. You can build resources alongside students to help them also the ideas from previous classes. And something that I've been, I was starting this little study group. I was trying to go for something that was very project style for very basic levels. And so this is I kind of adapted it here to the first grade program that I showed you earlier. And what it is I would have children gradually build like a little town, like build their character, build some houses, build some buildings, and then relate most of the vocabulary and most of the skills that I would want them to produce to this very physical material where they can kind of play with it and they can kind of use it in many different ways. We can use it to count things. We can use it to uh, tell a story about a character. We can use it to be descriptive, to describe colors, to practice numbers, to practice times of year, holidays, weather. So you can make it very notebook, or you can make it very physical, which was the case, what I was kind of going for, because I wanted it to be done at the same place where I coach gymnastics. So it's like a more spread out classroom where I can just put things on the floor and it's no problem. So again, in this case, what you would do is you would build from very basic things, like think, okay, what comes first? What do I need them to do with their little dolls or characters? Okay, maybe I want to start with pronouns, possessive adjectives, and then just talk about a little character, a little paper doll. Like, who is he? He is blah, blah, blah. Which one is you? Which one looks like her? Possessive adjectives, which what thing belongs to whom, right? And then go for like practices for numbers, for colors, how many green things are there, how many blah blah blah, and then start basing each of the sessions on questions, specific questions that start strengthening all of these vocabulary items, but also get them started describing things in a familiar setting where you can change small things, like maybe get rid of the snow for the spring and then put the snow back in for the winter. And then have people find things once they have some of these vocabulary items, like who has or where is a person with green hair, and oh, because I'm imagining green hair and brown eyes and whatnot. And the thing is, again, you can make it quite simple and you can get pretty available, easily available materials that you can just print out and have people kind of personalize. And you can also make it relevant to that they're familiar with, things that are relevant to their space, as well as a vocabulary that is expected from a given program. You can make it about like you can get people to clothe their own characters and change some of their features. You can move things around in a cardboard, and you can make this project style learning like something that you build on different classes, and which can connect objectives in your sequence. So yeah, I think that I don't know if anyone else has had any ideas of ways in which they could kind of connect their classes, or if when they were doing their plan, they were thinking, okay, so maybe I need to cut it down a little, but then I can build towards something larger. I think that that was also something that came up last class. Like, okay, so maybe in this class, I just do this bit, and then next class, I can ask them to do it in a map or move around the classroom with this vocabulary. Did anyone find themselves planning more than one class when they were planning their class? Oh, I think my connection is weird again. I'm gonna stop sharing, but yeah, Sandra.
Sorry, I'm not sure if I got the question. Like, if any of us did what during class?
if any of you find yourselves planning for more classes when you started planning out your class, did that happen where you were like, okay, so I'm going to step back a little bit because I need more stuff. So then I would do this, but then I could make that into like a sequence of classes.
Oh, okay. I think I did that. I kind
Can you
of
tell us
like
a little bit?
chopped a lot of things from my first class because it was a lot. And then I kind of still used the things that I took from my first class for my second one. I did personal introductions in the first one, and I stayed with what's my name and what's my age. And then I put in the second class the colors and the verb I like. So like the big picture is still personal introductions, I think.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, but that was not my plan initially. I think it just happened.
Yes. That does happen. So yeah, sometimes when you're planning a class, you find yourself planning a sequence because you're thinking larger objectives. I feel like that's very often the case, and it's a great idea to go with it because then once you start breaking it down, it makes more sense. And then you can also start thinking about all of these other things, all of these issues. Like maybe I need to review this in order to really get them to learn this new thing that I want them to learn. Maybe this thing I can break down into smaller tasks that then build towards a more full understanding and a fuller practice of the structure that I'm going for. Maybe I can make it into a little project, and then that project can connect somehow to my next objective, and it can be like a starting point. So the whole thing would be like having the things that you've done before help you kick off on the new things that you want to include and that you want to cover in class. So any thoughts, any reflections about this that you want to share? Some people did not have their coffee this morning. You're very untalkative today, guys. Are you already in a weekend mood? Is that it? Are you thinking about the week? I'm thinking about the weekend a little bit. So, for example, the class that you all planned for, have you thought about how it might connect to another class? Sorry. Yes, Antonio, go for it.
Planning a class about hobbies and that kind of vocabulary. When I had to make the second one, I wasn't sure how I was going to be able to connect that with the first one, but in the second one, I add the personal information phrases like "Hi, my name is blah blah blah," and I tried to connect it with the hobbies of the first class and create a new phrase, like a presentation phrase that says, "Hi, my name is Antonio, and my favorite hobby is that. How about you?" And try to connect the uh, phrase with the phrases of the first class. I think maybe uh, the second one should be the first one, and the first one should be the second one. First should be the presentation phrase, and then the class about the hobbies. But well, I did it in the other way and try to make sense out of it.
Good. That's good. Yeah, I like that. And that's very much the idea of cumulative learning, where maybe the thing that you learned last class completely connects to the next thing, right? So it's like, oh, okay, now it makes sense. So even going about it backwards could be an interesting way to approach certain topics. And it would be like, okay, so now I have all of these hobbies that I know the words for and I know how to say whether I like or not. And now I can connect it to actually meeting someone and it kind of lands it in the real world and it makes a little more sense. So that's kind of cool. I like that. And Sandra is saying, I think it's a good exercise to practice what you teach. Wait, practice teaching a topic when they don't know a different topic. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, obviously we can't go back to the very start of English every time we teach a new class. So we do need to start somewhere and then maybe just do little callbacks to things that we kind of at that moment kind of notice whether they're being understood or not. We maybe find little ways of checking and then we can build from where we are. And again, like move back and forth. Don't be afraid to move a little bit more slowly if that's what's needed, to spend a little more time on something if that seems necessary, and to start kind of bringing the new topic in beforehand so you can have more connectivity. So yeah, I think that's pretty much everything I have to share with you for now. And I think we are reaching that time, right? Sam, are we? So I just want to thank everyone for, I want to really thank the people at Enseña por Mexico for inviting me to spend some time with you. And I really want to thank you for all of your reflections and all of the things that you've made me reflect on. Because English teaching is also a learning process, and I love to have shared a part of that with you.